Hello, my dear listeners. Thank you for being here with me today. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, please subscribe and hit that like button. I always love reading where you're listening from in the comments below. Now, make yourself comfortable. Here's my story. For 63 years, I thought my life was ordinary. Nothing worth telling. I was Margaret Collins, a quiet woman who lived like a shadow in her own home. The apartment my late husband Robert and I received years ago had become someone else's space. My son David and his wife Jessica had taken over everything. I lived in what used to be a storage closet. The smallest room in my own home. My books, Robert's photos, his favorite reading chair. Everything had been pushed into my tiny space to make room for Jessica's modern, empty lifestyle. I didn't complain. Why would I? All I wanted was for David to be happy. Every morning started the same. 6 a.m. sharp. I'd tiptoe to the kitchen, make David's breakfast, brew 2 different teas. His strong and black. Hers some fancy herbal blend with foreign flowers that made my throat burn. I drank simple tea in my room, staying out of their way. My entire pension went straight to their accounts. "Mom, why do you need money?" David would say, looking away uncomfortably. "We buy everything together anyway." And I agreed. What did I need money for? I wore old clothes, rarely left the house except for groceries or the pharmacy. All my desires had withered down to one simple wish. Seeing my son happy. I remember giving away my eye surgery savings when Jessica urgently needed a new coat. "Maggie," she cooed, putting her arm around my shoulders. "You understand, right? David's colleagues are all so successful. I need to look the part for his career." David nodded gratefully at me. So I gave her the money and bought stronger reading glasses instead. My opinion meant nothing in that house. If I said the soup was too salty, Jessica would purse her lips. "Margaret, at your age, taste buds aren't what they used to be." If I tried giving David advice based on my life experience, he'd gently interrupt. "Mom, things are different now. We'll figure it out." They figured things out. And I was just a function. Cook, cleaner, unpaid ATM. An invisible person whose presence was convenient but not necessary. Sometimes in the evenings, sitting in Robert's old chair, I'd look at his photograph and whisper, "Bobby, we raised our son right, didn't we? He's a good boy. Life is just different now." The photo stayed silent, and I convinced myself I was doing the right thing. Mothers are supposed to sacrifice for their children. Aren't they? Then came my 63rd birthday. I expected nothing, as always. Maybe a small bouquet of daisies or a box of my favorite chocolates. That morning, Jessica was surprisingly affectionate. She even hugged me and chirped, "Happy birthday, Maggie. David and I have such a special gift for you. You're going to be amazed." Something warm stirred inside me. A forgotten feeling of childish excitement. Of hope. David was unusually fidgety too, constantly checking his watch. "Get ready, Mom," he said. "We're going to get your present." I put on my best dress. The only unworn one I had left. Blue cotton with tiny white flowers. I looked in the mirror and saw an elderly woman with tired but somehow hopeful eyes. We got in the car. Jessica stayed home, claiming a headache. "You two go ahead," she waved. "Tell me all about it later." We drove for hours. City streets became suburban highways, then empty fields and broken fences. I tried asking David where we were going, but he answered with single words. "Surprise, Mom. You'll see." My heart grew heavier with each mile. This road didn't lead to any resort, any nice place to celebrate a birthday. This road led to nowhere. Finally, we turned onto a broken dirt path. The car shook so violently my teeth chattered. Around us were only abandoned fields, weeds, and crooked power lines. Then I saw it ahead. A village. Or what was left of one. A few houses sunken into the earth, blackened by time. None looked inhabited. David stopped in front of the ugliest building. It wasn't even a house, more like a barn with a collapsed roof and windows boarded up. Tall weeds surrounded it, and the fence was rotting. "We're here," he said quietly, turning off the engine. I couldn't speak. I didn't understand. This couldn't be happening. It had to be some mistake, some cruel joke. David got out, opened the trunk, and pulled out my old suitcase. The one I used for weekend trips 20 years ago. Inside was spare underwear, a bathrobe, and soap. He set it down next to a patch of weeds. "Here you go, Mom." He gestured at the ruins. "This is your gift. Jessica and I bought you your own house. In the fresh air. You'll live here. It'll be good for you." The words fell into deafening silence like stones into a deep well. I stared at him, my son, and didn't recognize him. His face was cold, his eyes empty and glassy. No anger, no pity, nothing. Just exhaustion and irritation. "David," I whispered, my voice barely working. "What is this? Why?" "Mom, don't start," he grimaced. "We decided this is better for everyone. You need a break from city stress, and we need our space. Jessica's pregnant." He threw out those last words like a trump card, like justification for everything. He wouldn't even look at me. He was in a hurry. He got back in the car, slammed the door. I stood there on the road, watching him through the windshield. He started the engine. And in that moment, when the roar of the motor tore through the dead silence of the village, something happened inside me. It wasn't rage or hurt or despair. It was something else entirely. Deep in my chest, where warm, forgiving love had lived all these years, something clicked. Loud and clear, like turning a metal key in a rusted lock. Click. And in place of warmth came cold. Absolute, crystal clear ice. The car pulled away, raising a cloud of dust. I didn't cry. I didn't scream after him. I just watched as the silver side of his car got smaller, became a dot, and disappeared around the bend. The dust slowly settled. The smell of gasoline faded. Only I remained, with my old suitcase and a dead house at the edge of a dead village in deafening silence. And in that silence, I heard myself for the first time in years. Not a mother, not a mother-in-law, not a servant. Just me. Margaret Collins. And this Margaret spoke to me in a very calm, very clear voice. "Enough. I understand now that this isn't the end. This is the beginning. And no one will ever take my life from me again. I'll take it back myself." The dust from David's car slowly settled on the tall weeds by the roadside. I stood motionless, listening to the fading hum of the engine. When even that disappeared, silence fell. A silence I hadn't heard since childhood visits to my grandmother's farm. But that childhood silence had been alive, filled with cricket songs and rustling leaves. This was dead, oppressive. I slowly turned and looked at my gift. This house blackened by time and weather, with boarded windows and a tilting porch. One step had collapsed, showing last year's rotting leaves underneath. A scene of complete abandonment. A place forgotten by everyone. A place where I was brought to be forgotten. Tears. No. Inside felt dry as a desert. That icy click in my chest had frozen everything that might have poured out in bitter sobs. But then I remembered something. Something I tried not to think about all these years. I remembered my husband Robert's words. We'd been sitting in that same kitchen 10 years before he died, and he'd placed documents in front of me. "Margaret," he'd said, looking me straight in the eyes. "Tomorrow I'm going to the notary and signing my share over to you completely. So you'll be the sole owner." I'd waved my hands then. "Why, Bobby? We're family. We have David." He'd shaken his head. "David is David, but life is long. Anything can happen. You're my only one, and I need to know you'll always have your own place. Yours, and no one else's." I hadn't thought much of it then, but I did as he asked. After his death, all documents were in my name. Margaret Collins, sole and complete owner. David didn't know this. He assumed the apartment was joint inheritance that would naturally pass to him someday. I never corrected him. Why would I? It seemed petty, like distrusting my own son. How wrong I was. Then came the second memory, even more important. 5 years ago, I'd received notice of an inheritance. A distant cousin from upstate had died, someone I'd met once as a child. Lonely and childless, she'd left me her modest one-bedroom apartment. I went there, handled the paperwork, sold it without haggling to the first buyers, and put the entire sum in a separate savings account. I never told David and Jessica. They were taking out a big loan for a new car then. I knew what would happen if they learned about my money. It wouldn't be stolen. No, it would just dissolve into urgent needs, status purchases, their future. Just like my pension, my old savings, my health had dissolved. So I stayed quiet. Not from greed, but from survival instinct. That account was my emergency fund, my last line of defense that nobody knew about. These thoughts flashed through my mind not as vague images, but as clear, precise facts. Like someone had turned on a light in a dark closet, and I could see all the tools I had. I opened my suitcase. David had apparently packed it himself in a hurry. An old terry bathrobe, slippers, towels, a bar of soap. And at the very bottom, among these simple belongings, lay my salvation. An old flip phone that Jessica mockingly called a grandma phone. They'd bought it for me years ago so I could stay in touch. The simplest model, no internet, no fancy features. They had no idea that its memory contained phone numbers that were now more precious to me than anything in the world. I pressed the power button. The battery was almost full. I always kept it charged out of old habit. But the screen showed no network signal. My heart, which had been beating steadily and coldly, skipped for a moment. Was this all for nothing? I looked around. The village was in a valley. I needed higher ground. Without thinking long, I walked along an overgrown path away from the house, up the slope of a small hill. My feet tangled in burrs, branches whipped my face, but I didn't notice. I walked, watching the phone screen like a compass. And there, at the very top of the hill where a lone crooked birch tree stood, 2 weak signal bars appeared. Enough. I found the number in my contacts. Anatoly Borisovich. Bank manager, Robert's age. He'd known me since Robert and I opened our first account together. I pressed call. Long, drawn-out rings. "Hello," came a familiar, slightly tired voice. "Anatoly Borisovich, hello. This is Margaret Collins." My voice sounded steady, without a single tremor. I surprised myself. "Margaret, good afternoon. How can I help you?" Surprise flickered in his voice. I hadn't called him personally in years. "Anatoly Borisovich, I need you to do several things. Urgently, right now if possible." "I'm listening." "First, please block all authorizations and access to my accounts issued to my son, David Robert Collins. Everything, without exception." A pause hung on the other end of the line. "Are you certain, Margaret?" Absolutely, I cut him off. Second, all my pension deposits that go to our joint card, please immediately redirect to my personal savings account. The one I opened 5 years ago. You remember? Yes, of course. It will be done. And third, completely cut off his access to viewing balances on my deposits. Complete financial isolation. From this minute, all operations on my accounts only with my personal confirmation. Personal confirmation. I understand, Margaret. Everything will be completed within the hour. Thank you, Anatoly Borisovich. Good day. I pressed end call. The first part of my plan was in motion. Now for the second part. I found another number. Sergey Valeryevich, lawyer. He'd helped me with my cousin's inheritance paperwork. Young, competent, very thorough. He answered almost immediately. Sergey Valeryevich, hello. This is Margaret Collins. We worked together on the upstate apartment. Margaret, of course I remember you. Hello. Has something happened? Something has happened, I answered calmly. I need your help. It's about my apartment on Maple Street. I need to officially confirm my sole ownership and prepare documents that will exclude any claims on it from third parties, including my son. The lawyer was quiet for a second, processing the information. I understand. You want to completely protect your property. That's reasonable. Send me copies of your passport and ownership documents by email, and I'll start work. I'll prepare an official notification if needed. I can't send anything right now. I'm out of town, and I don't have the documents with me. They're all back at the apartment. But can you start making inquiries with the registry office? Yes, of course. I can start immediately. You can count on me, Margaret. I am counting on you. Thank you. I lowered the phone. The cold in my chest hadn't gone anywhere, but now it felt different. This wasn't the cold of numbness. This was the cold of steel. The cold of a tool ready for work. I walked back down the hill to the house, and now it looked different. It no longer seemed like a grave to me. More like a temporary headquarters. A quiet, secluded place from which I would wage my bloodless war. Meanwhile, I knew that in my apartment, in my living room, my son and his wife were probably drinking champagne. Celebrating how cleverly they'd managed everything. Finally got rid of the old lady, Jessica was probably saying, taking a sip. Now we can renovate and live like human beings. They were celebrating their victory. They had no idea they'd just lost the war without even knowing it had begun. The call came 3 days later, toward evening. I was sitting on the surprisingly sturdy porch, finishing herbal tea made from currant leaves I'd found in the overgrown garden. The phone rang sharply and unpleasantly, breaking the evening silence. David's name appeared on the screen. I let it ring several more times before answering. Inside, everything was calm. Yes, I said. Mom, finally. Where have you been? I've been trying to reach you for an hour. His voice carried that familiar condescending irritation. I'm not going anywhere, David. I'm breathing fresh air. There's plenty of it here, I answered evenly. Okay, how are you settling in? He asked in the tone of someone performing an unpleasant but necessary formality. Getting settled bit by bit. Thanks for your concern. He missed my quiet irony completely. Listen, Mom, we have a situation. Jessica's card was declined at the store. Your supplemental one. There should definitely be money there. I checked this morning. You didn't accidentally press anything. Maybe there's some glitch at the bank. Call them, okay? Ah, there it was. The first crack in their serene confidence. I stayed silent, letting him talk. You need to call and tell them everything's fine. Jessica got upset. She wanted to buy herself a dress. I pictured the scene. My daughter-in-law in an expensive boutique, holding out my card that my pension regularly filled, seeing declined on the terminal. Her surprise. Then indignation. How could this be? The old woman's account failed her. Mom, are you listening? David hurried me along. I'm listening, I said quietly. Then I heard him, apparently covering the phone with his hand but not very carefully, speaking to someone. I don't know, she's just sitting there silent. And in response came a clear voice like breaking glass. Jessica's voice. I would have recognized it among thousands. Contemptuous, hissing. Why waste time talking to her? She's putting on a show. Decided to show some character in her old age, the poor thing. She's offended, you see. Well, let her sit there in her wilderness without a penny. She'll become meek quickly enough and call herself. Tell her to stop acting stupid and go sort it out. I need that dress. Then David's voice again, quieter, conciliatory. Jess, wait. And her again, louder. Wait for what? We have the kitchen installer coming tomorrow, and our utilities aren't paid. I got a text about overdue bills today. Did she disconnect that from her grandma phone too? Her senile dementia is getting worse. You know what I'm telling you. We shouldn't have bought her a house. We should have found her a spot in a nursing home. Senile dementia. Show. Sit without a penny. These words didn't wound me. They were like a diagnosis, final and irreversible. They confirmed everything I'd understood that day when David left me on that road. To them, I wasn't human, wasn't a mother. I was a thing. A function. Inconvenient, aging furniture that had suddenly started malfunctioning. All that tiny hope, beaten into the farthest corner of my soul, that maybe I was too harsh, maybe I'd acted rashly, all of it evaporated in that moment. In the phone came rustling again, and David's voice became loud, directed at me again. Mom, are you there? So will you call the bank? I took a breath. The air was cool and clean. No, David, I said very quietly but distinctly. What? You can't or you won't. Bewilderment crept into his voice. Figure it out yourselves, I said and pressed the end call button. Days passed, blending into one endless but meaningful work. I stopped counting whether it was the fourth or fifth day. What did it matter here, in this silence? Time wasn't measured by calendar numbers but by completed tasks. My anger, that cold anger born on the dusty road, had settled. It didn't disappear. No, it simply sank to the bottom of my soul like heavy, dense frost, becoming my foundation. On the second day, I decided to explore the attic. I climbed the makeshift ladder, expecting to see only junk and cobwebs. That's what was there. But in the farthest corner, under a layer of old sacks, I found a small wooden chest, unlocked. I blew off the dust and lifted the heavy lid. Inside, on fabric yellowed by time, lay neat stacks of letters tied with string and a thick album in a velvet cover. I took it down, sat on the porch, and opened it. The faces of long-gone people looked back at me. Serious men in uniforms, women in simple scarves, round-faced children. Weddings, army send-offs, just photos in fields. A whole life lived in this house looked back at me from faded pictures. I didn't know these people, but somehow felt a strange kinship with them. They too had lived, worked, loved, raised children on this land. I flipped through the pages and thought about my own album, left back in the city. The thick blue one with photos of Robert and me. Our wedding. David's birth. His first day of school. College. Here we all are together at the beach. David's still a little boy, building a sand castle. My apartment wasn't just walls and square footage. It was the same kind of album, a repository of my life. Every cup, every book on the shelf, every scratch in the hardwood floor was a line in my story. The thought that strangers were now making themselves at home there cut sharper than any reproach. I realized I wasn't fighting for property. I was fighting for my past, for the right to my own memories. With these thoughts, I climbed my communication hill as usual toward evening. I decided to call lawyer Sergey Valeryevich to find out if there was any news. He answered immediately, as if waiting for my call. But his voice wasn't as cheerful as last time. Somewhat tense. "Margaret, good evening. It's good you called. I was just about to track you down." "Is something wrong, Sergey Valeryevich?" I asked, and my heart, which had been beating calmly and evenly, made an anxious somersault. "Let's say there are some complications," he chose his words carefully. "I made preliminary inquiries as we agreed. Your ownership of the apartment on Maple Street is indisputable. You're the sole owner. Everything's clean. Then what's the problem?" I asked impatiently. He was quiet. "Margaret, there's a lien on your apartment." The word was unfamiliar to me. "What does that mean?" "It means certain restrictions have been placed on your property. It cannot be sold, gifted, or used for any other transactions until this lien is removed." "What lien? Where did it come from?" The cold began returning, but now it was different. Anxious, prickly. And then the lawyer said a phrase that split my world into before and after. He said it quietly, almost matter-of-factly, but for me it sounded like an explosion. "Margaret, your apartment is collateral for a commercial bank loan. A credit agreement has been executed for a very large sum." I was silent. I couldn't breathe. Air stuck somewhere in my throat. Collateral. Credit. How? When? When? "The agreement was executed 8 months ago," Sergey Valeryevich answered. 8 months. A picture flashed instantly in my mind. Last winter. I was seriously ill. Pneumonia. 2 weeks in bed with high fever. Almost delirious. David was at work, and Jessica. Jessica took care of me. She was so attentive, bringing broths, changing compresses, running to the pharmacy, and constantly fussing with some papers. "Maggie, some documents came from the tax office. You need to sign them before the deadline expires. Don't get up, I'll bring them to you." "Maggie, this is just a form for the housing committee. Pure formality. Just sign here." I remembered how she slipped me sheets of paper, holding them so I could barely see what was written. The letters swam before my eyes from weakness and fever. I trusted her. She was my son's wife, my family. I signed without looking, just wanting her to leave me alone, to sink back into merciful oblivion. "Sergey Valeryevich," my voice trembled, but I pulled myself together. "My signature is there." "Yes, Margaret, according to the documents, you personally acted as the collateral provider. The signature is notarized." I didn't need him to finish. I understood everything. This wasn't just document forgery. This was worse. This was betrayal at the moment of my absolute helplessness. They didn't simply deceive me. They took advantage of my illness, my weakness, my trust. They watched me fight for every breath, and at the same time coldly slipped me a financial noose to sign. "What's the amount?" I asked, and my voice now sounded like metal scraping glass. The lawyer named a figure. It was monstrous, comparable to the cost of the apartment itself. Money I wouldn't see even if I lived 3 more lifetimes. Inside me, something snapped. That thin thread that still connected me to my former faith in people, in family, in my son. It didn't just break. It withered, turned to ash. I suddenly saw everything in true light. Their plan wasn't simply to evict me from the apartment. No, it was far more diabolical. They had taken enormous money against the collateral of my life, my only asset. Spent it or planned to spend it on their beautiful life, new kitchen, dresses, whatever. And then, when it came time to pay the bills, they would simply let the bank take the apartment. And me, they had evacuated me beforehand, hidden me in this wilderness so I wouldn't interfere, wouldn't get in the way, wouldn't learn anything until it was too late. This broken house wasn't just a gift. It was my tomb. A place where I was supposed to quietly disappear while they finished consuming the remains of my life. Sergey Valerievich, I said into the phone, and my voice was hard as steel. I understand you. Do everything necessary. Pull up all the documents. Prepare lawsuits. We're going to fight. I've already started, Margaret. I'm on your side. I know, I answered and pressed end call. The news about the loan didn't break me. It hardened me, as if I'd been plunged into ice water and then thrust into fire, and I didn't crack but turned into steel. The next few days passed in a fog, but it wasn't the fog of despair, it was the fog of ultimate concentration. My mind worked clearly and continuously, like a well-oiled mechanism. Every evening I climbed the hill, and now it wasn't just a communication session, it was a war council. Sergey Valerievich became my eyes and ears there in the city, in that life that had already died for me. Margaret, we've filed a complaint with the prosecutor's office for fraud, he reported in his calm, professional voice. I've also sent an official notification to the bank, attaching medical records of your condition during the contract signing period. The bank is obligated to begin an internal investigation. Good, I said. What's next? Next, Margaret, we wait. The first shells were already flying toward their target. And then, on the 5th day after our conversation about the loan, it thundered. Evening, as usual, I was talking to Sergey Valerievich, but this time his voice sounded different. There was a note of restrained triumph in it. Well then, Margaret, he began without preamble. The ice has broken. This morning a courier delivered a registered letter with confirmation to your address for your son and his spouse. I pictured this morning. They're drinking coffee in my kitchen, discussing what color to order for the cabinet fronts. Doorbell rings. Courier. They sign for receipt, casually tear open the thick envelope. What's in the letter? I asked. Official notification on my behalf as your legal representative. It states your complete and sole right to the apartment, that any attempts to conduct transactions with it will be stopped through legal action. And most importantly, it contains a demand to provide an explanation within 24 hours regarding the loan agreement that we claim was concluded fraudulently. I was silent, listening to his words. But that's not all, he continued. Today morning the bank's security service, having received my documents, reacted harshly. All accounts that your son had access to, including credit cards and joint savings funds, have been frozen pending investigation. Anatoly Borisovich personally supervised it. Frozen. What a precise word. Their world, built on my money, on my deceived trust, had been covered with an icy crust. Did they try to do anything? I asked, already knowing the answer. Oh yes, the lawyer chuckled. The bank already called me. First your son rushed in, shouting, demanding, threatening. When they calmly explained that until the fraud investigation was complete, he wouldn't get a penny, he apparently went pale and left. An hour later his spouse arrived and threw a tantrum. Demanded to see the manager, screamed about consumer rights, said she'd sue the bank. She was politely shown the door. Their world is collapsing, Margaret. Faster than they expected. And then my phone rang again. David's number. I ended the call with Sergey Valerievich and took my son's call. Mom, what have you done? This wasn't my David's voice. That soft, slightly condescending tone he'd used with me for years was gone. This was a screech, high and breaking, full of animal terror. I stayed silent. Have you lost your mind? We got some papers from a lawyer. The bank blocked all our cards. Everything. We don't even have money for groceries. Are you trying to destroy us? He was gasping with rage and panic. In the background, I could hear Jessica's sobbing. Not quiet, bitter tears, but loud, demonstrative, hysterical wails. Do you understand what you're doing? He screamed. Jessica feels terrible. She can't be stressed. And you've decided to ruin our lives because of your senile delusions. I'm not doing anything, David, I answered quietly and calmly. What? You can't or you won't. Sort it out yourselves, I said and pressed the end call button. They came the next day, close to noon. I heard them long before I saw them. The roar of the engine that angrily and inappropriately tore through the quiet of this sleepy village, and the screech of brakes right at my house. Dust rose in a column, covering the wild currant bushes. I didn't move from my place. I sat on the same porch where they'd dumped me days ago, cleaning small potatoes I'd found in the overgrown garden with an old knife. Car doors slammed almost simultaneously. David jumped out first. Pale, haggard, with dark circles under his eyes. He wore an expensive shirt, but it was wrinkled, as if he'd slept in it. Behind him came Jessica more slowly. Her face was swollen, makeup smeared, but she still tried to hold her head high, with that expression of disgusted superiority that had become her second nature. They stopped a few steps from the porch, staring at me. I didn't raise my head, continuing to carefully peel the thin skin from a potato. This simple, monotonous work grounded me, kept emotions from taking over. Mom, David began. His voice was hoarse, pleading. He stepped forward, stretching out his arms as if wanting to hug me. I didn't pull away, just kept looking at my hands. Maggie, what is this? Why are you doing this to us? I put the peeled potato in a bowl of water and took the next one. I was waiting for you, I answered, not looking at him. This simple phrase apparently confused him. He'd expected screaming, reproaches, tears, anything but this icy, detached calm. We came to talk, he stammered. Mom, this is all some terrible misunderstanding. We're family. Families should help each other, not sue each other. He spoke rehearsed words, correct but empty. There wasn't a drop of sincerity in them, only fear. Fear of losing everything he considered rightfully his. Then Jessica's patience snapped. She stepped forward, pushing David aside. Enough of this circus, she hissed, her face twisted with malice. Have you completely lost your mind in your old age? Gone wild in your wilderness? What right did you have to block our accounts? Who gave you that right? She was almost screaming. Her voice, thin and unpleasant, hurt my ears. Do you even understand what you've done? She continued, pointing at me with her perfectly manicured finger. You've disgraced us. We had to cancel the kitchen order. Cancel it. People are laughing at us. And me. I can't be stressed. The doctor forbade it. I'm carrying a child, your grandchild, and you're driving us into poverty. She threw out her main trump card. Pregnancy. Before, that one word would have made me forget about myself and rush to fulfill any of their whims. But not now. The ice in my chest didn't even tremble. I slowly raised my eyes to her, simply looked, long, intently, without blinking. The way you look at an unfamiliar, unpleasant object. My gaze made her falter. She got confused, fell silent, but then recovered, and her face flushed red again. David picked up, again trying to play the peacemaker. Mom, really? Jessica's right, she can't be nervous. Please, let's solve everything amicably. You're offended, we understand, we're to blame. We acted hastily. Maybe this house isn't the best gift, but we'll fix everything, return everything. Just call your lawyer. Tell him you changed your mind. Right now. He held out his shiny smartphone. As if it were that simple. Call and all their lies, all their betrayal would disappear, erased like writing in sand. I put down the knife and the last potato in the bowl, wiped my hands on an old apron, and slowly stood up. I found myself on their level. They stood on the ground, I one step higher, on my porch. You want me to cancel everything? I asked quietly. Yes, Maggie, David nodded eagerly. Jessica looked at me defiantly, pressing her lips together. So that I give you my pension again, my apartment, my life? Mom, don't exaggerate, David grimaced. The apartment is jointly owned, and we would always take care of you. Like you took care of me when I was sick. I asked, and my voice became even quieter. But in the silence that fell, it sounded deafening. They froze. I shifted my gaze to Jessica. She instinctively took a tiny step back. I remember everything, Jessica, I said, for the first time in years calling her by her name the way she liked it. I remember how you sat by my bedside. I remember your caring hands. And I remember the papers you slipped me to sign. You said they were for the tax office, for the housing committee. Pure formality. Jessica's face went white as a sheet. Her anger, her confidence, her certainty, all of it drained away like bad makeup in the rain. Only naked animal fear remained. David looked back and forth between me and his wife, understanding nothing. Mom, what are you talking about? I looked at my son again. There was fear in his eyes, but also confusion. Maybe he really didn't know all the details. Maybe she'd fooled him too, or maybe he just preferred not to know. It didn't matter anymore. He was an accomplice. I'm talking about the loan, David, I pronounced each word clearly. About the big loan you took from the bank 8 months ago, using my apartment as collateral, with my signature that you obtained while I was unconscious with fever. Did you think I'd never find out? Did you think I'd die quietly here in this ruin while the bank took my home for your debts? The blow hit its target. I could see it in how David staggered, as if someone had punched him in the stomach. He looked at Jessica with horror and some new, bitter understanding. She wasn't looking at him. She stared at the ground, at her expensive shoes stained with village mud. All their tricks, all their manipulations crumbled to dust. They stood before me, naked in their greed and lies. The masks were torn off. The performance was over. So, David, I finished with my quiet, even voice. Do you still want me to call the lawyer? He couldn't say a word. He just opened and closed his mouth like a fish thrown onto shore. Jessica had pulled her head into her shoulders, transformed from predator to hunted animal. The pause was long, heavy. In that pause, the last drop of my maternal love for him died. Died and was buried right here, by this rotting porch. Leave, I said. It wasn't an order or a request. It was a simple statement of fact. Like saying it's raining or night has fallen. They silently turned around, not looking at each other, like marionettes whose strings had been cut, and trudged to their expensive, shiny car. Got inside. The engine started, no longer angry but somehow tired. The car slowly, almost uncertainly turned around and rolled away down the dusty road. I remained alone on the porch. 3 months later, I was back in my apartment on Maple Street. Not as a tolerated guest in a corner room, but as the rightful owner of every square inch. The fraud case had been straightforward once all the evidence was presented. The bank voided the illegal loan. Jessica faced criminal charges. David had disappeared from my life as completely as if he'd never existed. I kept the little house in the village too. Fixed it up, made it livable. Sometimes I go there when the city becomes too much. I tend the garden I planted where the weeds used to grow. But the most precious thing I gained wasn't property or money. It was myself. Margaret Collins. A woman who learned that it's never too late to stop being invisible. Never too late to fight back. Never too late to reclaim your own life. My neighbor Mrs. Henderson asked me once how I found the strength to do what I did. I told her about that moment on the dusty road, when something clicked inside my chest. When warmth became ice, and ice became steel. Sometimes, I said, the people who claim to love you the most are the ones trying hardest to erase you. And sometimes, being abandoned in the wilderness is exactly what you need to find your way home. The doorbell rings. I'm expecting no one, but I'm not afraid anymore. I open the door. It's a young woman, maybe 25, with tired eyes and a worn coat. She looks familiar somehow. Mrs. Collins. I'm Sarah, David's. I used to know your son. I heard what happened. I wanted to tell you, you were right to fight. He did the same thing to me and my mother. We weren't as strong as you. I invite her in for tea. There's always room at my table now for people who understand what it means to be invisible, and what it takes to become seen again. As I pour the tea, I think about Robert's photograph on the mantel. I imagine him smiling, proud of the woman his Maggie became. You did good, Bobby, I whisper. You taught me I was worth fighting for. And in the warm light of my own kitchen, in my own home, with someone who understands my story, I finally feel completely at peace. The ice in my chest has melted. But the steel remains.